When Raina sat down at the cafe, she was surprised to see Rick walk in and head toward her table. Rick and his wife, Louise, had been neighbors to Raina and her husband, Brad, for almost 4 years. Though they were both in their late 40s, a few years older than Raina and Brad, they'd formed a close bond with them, even spending vacations together, both with and without kids. "Rick, what a surprise," Raina said, a bit excited, glancing around the cafe. "Shouldn't you be at work?" Rick smiled, sitting down across from her. "I could say the same to you," he replied calmly. "Took the afternoon off for some personal matters." "I assume you did the same." Raina nodded. "Busy morning, and I needed to recharge. That's all. I never realized you were a fan of cafes like this one." Rick met her gaze but then paused, looking away. "Honestly, I saw you walk in and decided to join you. We need to talk." Raina's eyes widened. "Is something wrong? I hope nothing's happened to Louise." Rick lowered his eyes for a moment and then smiled at her. "No, everything's fine. But you and Brad have become very important to us, and we know we can count on you if anything happens to either of us." Raina gave him a reassuring smile. "I wouldn't hesitate to do the same. So, what's going on?" Rick took a deep breath before answering. "I'm fine, just a little nervous." He paused, and then in a lowered voice he asked, "Have you slept with him yet?" Raina's face flushed, and she stared at him, speechless. "What?" she stammered. Rick calmly repeated the question. "The guy you keep glancing at when you look toward the door. Have you slept with him?" "No, not at all." Raina's face turned red as she began moving her arms in an agitated manner. Rick smiled softly, shaking his head. "I see. Look, Raina, you need to listen to me. I'm going to tell you what's really going on, what you probably already think is happening, and then what he thinks about it. And that's the most important part." Raina nodded, her body tense. "He's charming, younger, maybe more successful than Brad. He seems to have better qualities than your husband, and you pour your soul out to him. He compliments you when you need it, always there when you need someone, and willing to sacrifice for you," Rick continued. "At some point it felt good, right? But he's filling a gap that Brad doesn't. So far, so good." Raina's body stiffened. "How do you know all of this? Does Frank know?" Rick nodded. "He suspects, of course. But there's no proof. You know it, and he knows it. But no proof. And those suspicions? They probably made you feel like you're the one who's right, while he's the one being an idiot." Raina looked down, her face flush with guilt. Rick continued, "2 things happened recently that you missed. Your son's birthday and your 9th anniversary dinner with Brad. Both because you were there for Mr. Charming, your so-called friend. You've been there for him, prioritizing him over your own family, and you've kept your connection with him a secret from Brad. Is that about right?" Raina swallowed hard, her hands shaking slightly. "Nothing happened, we're just friends. Friends who know everything about your husband, including intimate details you've probably never shared with me. And he feeds into your frustrations, turning everything you say about Brad into proof of what a terrible husband he is." "Did he kiss you? Was it during the time you missed your anniversary or your son's birthday?" Raina's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" Rick kept his gaze steady. "You told me about it already. When you missed your anniversary dinner, you said it was because he was depressed over the loss of a friend. But I can guess how things went, Raina. It wasn't just a kiss, was it?" Raina's eyes filled with tears. She lowered her head. "I don't know. We did some things, but we kept our clothes on. It was mostly emotional, I guess." Rick sighed softly. "Look, I don't think Brad's the man you want. You want someone who gives you what Mr. Charming gives you. But you also know that you're flirting with a line that shouldn't be crossed. You haven't gone all the way, but a part of you already feels guilty. And you hope Brad never finds out. But if he did, would you consider it cheating?" Raina's face tightened, and she whispered, "I don't know." Rick gave her a long look, then asked, "Are you going to tell him?" Raina didn't answer, her hand trembling slightly as she fought back tears. Rick leaned in slightly, his voice soft but firm. "Raina, you're still stuck between 2 worlds. I'm here to help you see the truth, even if it hurts. The choice you make now could define the rest of your life." Rick stood firm. "No, I'm not telling Brad anything, but he'll figure it out for himself. Here's what he thinks is going on. Mr. Charming spots an attractive, busy woman and sees vulnerabilities he can use to manipulate her." Raina flinched, but Rick raised a hand to stop her. "Mr. Charming knows this. He's experienced in these matters. Sorry for the bluntness," Rick continued, "but this isn't his first rodeo. You assume you're the one he's targeting, but you're not stupid enough to miss that he wants to sleep with you. Since you started seeing him behind your husband's back, the allure of something special between you two blinds you, making you feel like he's providing what your husband is missing. Charming's point isn't about you. It's about Brad. Rick paused, letting the words sink in. Charming enjoys the thrill of taking something away from Brad. That's why he convinced you to skip 2 major events, to show you care more about him than Brad. It wasn't a coincidence that those events lined up with the death of a friend and whatever other crisis happened. Brad's birthday is in 3 weeks, and I can guarantee something will come up to make you change your plans. It'll always be about Brad, not you. Rick raised an eyebrow. You were in Mr. Charming's arms while your husband waited at a restaurant for over an hour before you texted him, making up an excuse about staying late at work because a colleague got food poisoning. Not even creative enough to come up with a fake name so Brad couldn't check. And now you're skipping work to wait for Charming. You've shown your priorities. And it's not your marriage. Rena swallowed. He wants me. Rick's expression softened but remained serious. No, he doesn't want Brad to know. Not because he's trying to protect you. He's been asking about Brad, learning every detail through you. Charming knows Brad has every right to be suspicious, and he knows he can convince you it's an overreaction. He needs that suspicion to grow, to drive a wedge between you and Brad. Otherwise, he can't close the deal. Rick's voice lowered. Listen carefully. It's not about you. It's about Brad. Charming's endgame is simple. He'll take everything he can from you, then, once he thinks he's completely stolen you from Brad, he'll reveal his true intentions. He'll make sure Brad finds out, and then probably continue the physical relationship until he finds his next trophy. Rena was on the edge of tears. How do you know all of this? Rick smiled faintly. My wife and I have had a faithful marriage for many years. But I wasn't always married. You have 2 choices, he continued. You can keep going with this affair, trying to prove me wrong, that it won't end in betrayal or that it won't come to light. Or, you can stop now and try to salvage your marriage. But once Charming gets what he wants, he'll make sure Brad finds out. Maybe he'll even lie about how far things went. Rena's eyes filled with tears. Please, I can't let Brad find out. Rick walked over to her, giving her a calming hug and whispering in her ear. Then don't do anything. Don't even kiss anyone on the cheek without your husband knowing. Otherwise, I'm sure he'll find out. A voice suddenly came from behind them. Is that man bothering you? Rick turned to see a tall, slender guy with a large beard. You must be Reed, Rick said, extending his hand. Reed shook it reluctantly, and Rick squeezed his hand tightly, pulling him close. Listen, you piece of trash. If you make a scene, that finger is going to break. Don't talk to my wife. Don't talk about my wife. Or I will end you. Reed winced, pain in his voice. Who are you? Rick smirked. Since you're so concerned, let me tell you. I'm the only one you can talk to about this. If you keep pushing it, you're not just messing with a cookie jar. You'll lose your hand. She's not worth it, is she? Reed rubbed his hand, visibly shaken. No, definitely not, he mumbled. Rick let go and scoffed. What a waste of time. 2 months, and I've made almost no progress with that cold woman. Rick noticed everyone in the room was silent, watching. He stood with his hands raised, as Reed scrambled to get up and head for the door. Self-defense, Rick explained to the room. A man was abusing my sister, and you all saw how aggressive he became when I made him stop. Cheers of approval came from the crowd, and they went back to their business. Rick turned to Rena. You have a second chance. Go home and be the wife your husband deserves. I know it'll be hard, but tell him he was right to be suspicious, and you stopped before it was too late. Don't mention that I had to intervene. It's better for you. Rena wiped her eyes. Thank you. Rick nodded. I didn't do it for you, but for Brad, and maybe to atone a little for my own past actions. Have a good day.